Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday Unreal Engine Educators live stream. I'm Tom, and with me, as slightly unusual, are my co-hosts, Mark Flanagan and Louis Cataldi. There's Louis. Howdy, guys. And today we are joined by our very special guests. We have the UX research team from Epic Games here on the stream. And we're going to be talking about, unsurprisingly, UX research today. This is a really, really hot topic for game studios, educators, students. It's become a real foundation in how we develop interactive experiences at Epic and pretty much everywhere else. So we're really excited to have these guys on here to talk about this. So without any further ado, let me introduce our guests. We have Mr. Ben Tales, who is our UX lead at Epic Games. Welcome, Ben.
Hello.
We also have Nick Block, who is our UX data analyst here at Epic Games. Howdy, Nick. And of
Hello.
course, Brandon Newberry, who is a UX researcher here. Three of our most UX individuals that we could find. Well, welcome, guys. Welcome to the stream. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
UX is a very big topic, and it's something that we've been excited and looking forward to bringing on, because on this stream, one of the things we get to do is kind of crack open the vault doors into Epic and into game development in general, and bring on people like you guys who you might not typically know even are working in games, or you might have some preconceived notion. Even when we do streams with animators, there's so much to learn about what that really means. And so I'm really excited to have you guys here to share what you do every day and how you got here and what this means moving forward. So without further ado, might as well have you guys introduce yourself. I guess I'll start with you, Ben.
Sure. Ben Tales, actually Dr. Ben Tales.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's got to be correct. I'm the UX lead here at Epic, which mainly means that I'm work to make sure that everyone else on my team can do what they need to do and have the resources and like plugged into the organization enough that they know what's going on and that UX research is being promoted and that everyone on my team can get the research done. And my team, generally speaking, covers research for all of Epic. So not just the games, but also the engine and website, store, even internal tools.
Wow. That's a lot these days.
Yeah.
Nick, how about you? Just perfect timing.
Yeah, good timing. So I'm Nick Block, as you said. I'm a data analyst by trade. I've been at Epic Games for 3 years now, and I am a little bit different than I think maybe more traditional UX research in terms of I do our survey work. If you've ever gotten a survey from Epic Games, be it Fortnite, Unreal Engine, or many other products, likely I either made it, or I analyzed it, or both. And yeah, that's my wheelhouse. In addition to that, I do some basic data analysis based off gameplay data and things like that. I've been doing this for quite a while in other companies, but I definitely never had more fun than I've had at Epic doing it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's that's a pretty common refrain. And how about you, Brandon? Welcome to the stream.
Yeah, I'm Brandon. I'm a UX researcher here at Epic. I've been here for about 4 years, and kind of along the lines of what Ben was saying, we kind of handle a lot of different products, while Nick kind of handles some of the more larger scale things and surveys. A lot of my work revolves around kind of smaller scale, qualitative, like face-to-face interactions with products and players or users.
Well, that's very interesting that it's that just using the word qualitative in general. You know, when we hear research and a lot of, you know, game testing and stuff, qualitative is a word that doesn't get thrown around a lot because it seems like it's the harder side.
Yeah,
the harder, you know, you've got numbers and then you've got feelings and these things that seem, at least to me, I've always, when I see that we need to figure out the qualitative side of things, I'm like, ooh, that's that's really hard. I know numbers and statistics and I can give you a better frame rate. That's really interesting. And it's interesting too that each of you you know, obviously has your focuses, but how wide our focus is just in Epic in general and how much need there is for what we're doing, you know, as we went around the room there, you can start to hear immediately like you guys are working on so many things, and as Epic does all these new things, you get to be a part of it, which is also really, really cool. So before we dig in too far, we have to address the first issue, which is the I think it's common. Maybe it's just my own personal bias selection that I confound UI and UX, and in my mind, I didn't quite have the delineation of what that was. And we met last week, and I kept saying UI, and it was Ben was like, stop, just. So for our audience, for those of us that are not from the UX world and didn't get a stern talking to last week by Ben, can you guys, you know, tell us a little bit more about what UX means at Epic, what a little more about what you do, and kind of how that works at Epic, and what is UX?
Right. Well, UX is a term that in itself doesn't have great UX. It stands for user experience. And it typically, if we do contrast it with UI, so UI is the interface, the user interface, the interface that the user or the player is using to interact with the game. So say in Fortnite, UI would be the HUD that's on the screen that shows you your health and things like that. Or when you're in the front end, it would be the tabs to move between things like Battle Pass or the store. And UI, you know, very important part of the game, very important to get right, and in a lot of products. And you can do usability work on it, and you can do user experience work on it as well. User experience as a term is very broad, and it can make it hard to nail down because of that, but it essentially is the experience that the user has using the product from the moment they have it in their hands to the moment they finish with it. And in some definitions of UX, they even expand it to the first time you hear about it to when you like don't care about it. It can be that kind of all expansive, but it's more than just how usable is the product. It's also, especially in games, is how challenging or how engaging or how it makes you feel versus maybe is it clear or is it understandable, which is also part of the user experience. But the idea is that UX is intended to be a broad, all-encompassing term.
That's interesting. So it's it's a little bit, it sounds like it's a little bit like the term tech artist, where it's used very broadly. But there's a joke with tech artists that when two tech artists meet, you say, "Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a tech artist," and they're like, "Oh, I'm Joe. I'm a tech artist. Cool. What do you do?" Because it's such a broad field that, you know, even when two tech artists were like, that's not quite. It sounds like UX has kind of that same breadth and different companies and different products probably have very, like you said, some probably are very focused on, you know, a single feature, whereas others have this
Mhm.
very holistic view from the first time they hear about the product to wherever that end is.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think the whole kind of UI UX thing is because a lot of people that work in design, which we're not designers, we're researchers, but a lot of people that work in design are hired as UX UI roles. But you can also just hire a UX designer so a UX UI designer will focus on the UX of UI and will make UI in a lot of cases as the majority part of the job, although not necessarily all of it. Um, but someone who's a UX designer might be designing systems or designing other parts of a product that help with that user experience. Like even certain products have reputations for being, as soon as you get that box in your hand, it feels like nice and weighty in your hand, and you open it, and it's high quality products. Like that could be seen as part of the user experience, depending on how broad you want to get.
Interesting. And there's also a definition too between UX researcher and UX developer. And then obviously, you know, as we're saying, UI, because you know, if I go on job search, it's very often UX/UI. They
Mhm.
tend to get lumped together. So really, it's really key for us to kind of dig in and understand the differences, because like I said, as of last week, I had the wrong idea. And Ben, it sounds like, you know, part of your job, like you said, is even within Epic is helping all the departments understand what the UX department does and what you guys can do for other departments. And so the three of you are researchers, correct? Rather than developers, so all on the research side. Can you guys give us a
I mean, we're
little bit?
developers, but we're not designers, I guess.
Oh, okay. That's the word I'm looking for. So you're doing the research, less of the implementation, and so you work with designers and developers,
Yeah.
and you help inform their designs with research. Am I somewhere in the right ballpark? Maybe.
Yeah, no, that's correct. So, like you were mentioning, quantitative and qualitative research earlier, and part of our major role at Epic is when a designer or a developer comes to us with a problem. The ideal situation is we come up with whatever the right research methodology to address that problem is, and whether that's qualitative or quantitative doesn't really matter. The goal is like, here's the way to solve that issue for you via research, or to get you the information that you need.
So that's interesting too, because I don't think most people assume that Epic Games has a team of researchers with PhDs and degrees and whatnot. I won't get into that. I'll let you guys introduce your own degrees and stuff. But it's this is something else that's really cool that we get to do on this stream is show some of these positions that you know, when people are thinking, I want to work in the games industry, I want to work for Epic, I want to work, you know, in this really dynamic field. Um, Showing that you don't just have to be an artist or a programmer, that there are these, you know, vast other things that you can take your interest and your passion for games, and they can work together. And so you know, research is not something that I think a lot of people think about. Like I can get a PhD and go and work in games. So can you guys give our audience a little bit of background about kind of how you each got here? Um, this time I'm gonna single out Brandon, because I was hoping that he would take a sip just then. Almost had it.
I got my sip in a minute ago. I'm ready to go.
I missed it. But Brandon, so where did you come from? Did you go to school like, I want to work in games? How did you get here? How did this happen?
So I've got a bachelor's degree in psychology. While I was getting my bachelor's degree, I was very interested in human factors, which is it's in the same vein as UX, just kind of more on the academic side. So while I was there, I worked in a human factors lab at Georgia Tech. We did a lot of research there with usability and user acceptance with older adults in different technologies. So like what kind of technologies can make things easier for adults. I was never I didn't go to school to get into games, but games I think has always been in the background. A lot of projects involving gaming. Even at when I was at Georgia Tech, games came up with is what are the effects of like the Wii in physical mental health with older adults or things like that in general. Games tend to always creep up in the areas that I was researching or helping research. And then once I was out of school, I actually went and took I got UX courses from Bentley, and that ended up with an internship at an ad placement company, or kind of working my way here as a UX lab analyst, which is one of our other positions.
Very cool. That's very cool. It's interesting how games were always kind of there calling to you, just kind of poking in. Like,
I mean,
and maybe you were self-selecting, those projects too, because they fit in. But we hear this a lot that as games become more of a core part of our society, that it's becoming increasingly difficult to find a field where games do not impact it, either from like you were talking about, kind of a social way, or in a we deal with it a lot from the technological standpoint, and there was that already happening as you were building up your career. Very cool. What about you, Nick? How did you get here?
I actually like telling my story a lot. I feel it's a bit more of a non-traditional path. I love video games. Since I was a kid, I always liked them. I love building computers. As soon as I had like spare parts around the house, like that's my upbringing. But I went to college. To be honest with you, I did not take it super seriously. I have a psychology degree, and I did good, and I think my teachers really liked me. But I was working a full-time job at the same time, so it wasn't my priority. So once I had my bachelor's, I didn't know how to find work with it. It was very difficult. So I actually went and taught English in Korea for a while. That was super fun. And I came back, and same situation, finding a job is hard. So I was actually a recruiter. That was my first professional job as a recruiter. I worked as a third-party recruiter at a small company out of Charlotte. And then I did first-party recruiting, which is when you work within a corporation hiring for that same corporation. So I learned a lot about the job field, like the job industry from that. And after you fire enough people in your life, you decide it's not right for you. And I moved, I want to get out of recruiting. So I took more or less the first job I could find in tech. And my goal was just to move into tech in itself. So I actually went to phone support at a small company called ThinkGate, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was the education software company. And that was a wild ride. It was a really small company, super agile. So I went from being phone support to being a data analyst 3 months later, first time ever writing SQL, first time ever doing that kind of work. And then 6 months after that, they gave me my own team. So I was running a team of people, and it was fantastic. I learned so much so quickly. And then they went under. I went to California for a while. I worked at some cool companies as a contractor, including Intel and Google. And I worked full time at Blue Shield of California. All these are data analyst jobs. I was just getting really good at being a data analyst. And up to this point, I'd actually applied to Epic quite a few times because living in Charlotte, where I was raised, Epic was the closest we had to a game company. There was no game company in Charlotte. So you have, I think Insomniac is a small presence out here. You have Red Storm, and then you have Epic Games. So I was applying for a lot of that time. But I do think getting Google on the resume really helped. It made people kind of notice me. Yeah. So 10 years later, after I got my degree, actually not quite 10 years, but 7 years after I got my degree, I actually got a job here. Ben gave me a chance to be a data analyst on his team. And honestly, I'd never heard of UX before I got this job. This is my first time ever hearing about it. My experience is purely data and running queries and using really good analytics tools, basically. But working with Ben, Brandon, and the rest of the team, I've learned how to take that and kind of apply it in a very different way. I'm not just providing data, now I'm actually analyzing it. I'm trying to find the underlying causes and stuff like that, which has been fascinating and super it's been a great experience. Like it's been super cool. But yeah, I came here more or less by building up my data analysis experience and then jumping ship over to gaming as soon as someone would kind of hear me. And I'm so lucky it was Epic Games, because I mean, I was here for the explosion of Fortnite. I was here to I've seen so much amazing stuff happen here, and it's been so cool to be helping do the research at one of these growing biggest companies in the
Yeah.
so yeah, that's more or less my story.
I'm kind of curious about something for you all. So, Epic has had I would say a history of UX or a reputation. I think there's been some people that have spoken on the circuit and spoken at GDCs from the UX team at Epic, and I think have written books and so forth. So I would presume that Epic has a decent reputation for doing UX, for having UX research. I know that the UX lab at Epic has been around for a while, and people have been coming in and participating in it. And I know that I've been familiar with the UX practices at Epic for 6 years or so. And so I would imagine that if you are interested in this field and you've been at GDCs or other SIGGRAPHs or places where you've heard people from Epic talk about it, because I know that if you just Google UX, you might run across some people from Epic speaking about the practices that you might hear from some folks at Epic talking about how Epic uses UX research in particular, and that's only probably multiplied as things like Fortnite come up and Unreal Engine and so forth. So has that helped you all or influenced you all in targeting Epic, or I would presume it influences anyone out in the UX fields who are like, well, gosh, that's a company that's really using UX probably effectively, or a company that uses UX really. That's got to be a good thing. I know for me, when we were reaching out to you guys, that's a great reason to talk to you all and to present you all through our live stream, because with regard to educators and those people studying UX as a whole, I think that this is a good example of a UX research group that is well used by a company to influence its products, right? And so I wanted to make sure, and talking with Tom and the rest of the team, that we brought you guys forward and really shared how valuable you are to Epic, to the games that are made, and also to the software that is made through Epic, because it seems to me that Epic, all the products, and it's not just games and it's not just software, it's pretty much everything, everyone gets access to you guys, and probably there's a line of people waiting to get access to the data that you can make available to the company. But so my question is multifold. If you are outside looking in, I imagine if you're interested in this field, your Epic's got to be one of those companies you're like, yes, I want to go work for Epic because they do UX and they do it well, for one. And for two, it must be great to be inside of Epic where the company values UX research in the way that it does. Would you all, say that would be accurate?
So I would hope that Epic UX has a good reputation outside. I'm not sure. I'm not outside, so it's hard to judge, but I would hope that it does for sure. And certainly we get a lot of interest whenever we do have a position open. The field is relatively small, though, so it can be difficult finding people to join the team, but it depends on the level that things are at. For the fact that we offer research support to all of Epic, we are a relatively small team compared to the size of teams that other game companies have of similar roles. However, we try and make sure that we don't get overloaded and we get around the place. But I should also make it really clear that our role is to inform and provide research. The designers and developers are the people that produce the really awesome stuff that ultimately gets in people's hands. We're there, but I certainly feel uncomfortable if anybody's like, oh, Epic's got excellent UX because we exist. A lot of the designers and developers at Epic just have good instincts for UX as well. and we help out and we help where we can, but that's always the big thing about games, right? Is games are such a collaborative experience. It's hard to say like this one person is responsible for the thing, or this one department. It just all comes together and makes this product, which is similar to the idea of UX overall, of it being the experience from start to finish.
And part of that, you mentioned that our team is smaller than maybe some other teams, and I think that we probably hear that a lot on the stream. And at Epic, we tend to try and do as much as we can with as little as possible. Sometimes it seems, but really, I have to give you guys some props, because I feel like, with our limited resources and the high importance of the work that's being done, you guys have really stepped up in the creativity and the ability to find the right research to do when you have so much, when your resources are as limited as yours are. Being creative is such a big part of that, because you can't just go and throw a bunch of surveys and a million questions and sort it out later. The strategy of how to do this, and the collaboration with the teams to develop that strategy seems really important for this work at Epic Games. And I know that in our work in evangelism, that thinking process of taking the time to think a little bit further about it, so that whatever work is done is as valuable as possible, is really key. And Ben, you say that that's part of your job as lead. Like you said, you do a lot less of the researching anymore, and you're their lead. So
yeah.
So the round table has spun around, and now I want to know, how did you get all the way there to, you've PhD'd, you've researched, and now you're in this position where you're trying to lead this team and lead, kind of what Epic is doing, and develop that strategy, which seems, that seems fairly challenging. So I'd love to hear kind of how you got there.
Yeah, so I think, I need to be honest and open that, like, part of why I'm here is luck, and part of why I'm here is help from a lot of people. I'm originally from New Zealand, and when I was growing up, I wanted to be a chef, gave that up, then wanted to be a zookeeper. I actually was a zookeeper for a year or so, looking after rhinos and rough lemurs and things like that at Hamilton Zoo, while I was doing my biology degree, which was super cool. But also, while I was doing my biology degree, I was doing the zookeeping, but I was also going to classes occasionally. And I took a class in cognitive psychology that was taught by Dr. Samuel Charlton, who's an American but had moved to New Zealand and was teaching at Waikato University. And his passion for human factors, which Brandon mentioned earlier, was really infectious. And human factors is essentially the study of how people interact with technology, and it has a core tenet at its heart that technology should be designed for people. People shouldn't have to change for technology. So technology should take into account the cognitive and perceptual abilities that people have, and not demand that we do things that are outside of those capabilities. And in particular, he was interested in road safety and traffic psychology. So because he was so inspiring, once I finished my biology degree, I actually shifted to psychology and got a master's in psychology with him, looking at road safety. And quite passionate about road safety. It's a very significant issue, and there's a lot of work in that area. But it's an interaction of how people and technology, which is the road and the cars and all this kind of stuff like that. After that, I was going to do a PhD in Helsinki, Finland, but unfortunately that lab was broken into while I was arranging that PhD, and that got shut down. So in the end, I ended up working for the New Zealand government for a few years as a scientist in the Ministry of Transport there. where I provided like research support, very similar to what I'm doing at Epic now, but research support about road safety and advising government direction.
Hmm.
And I'm old enough that user research or UX within games was not really a thing for most of that time period. I didn't really become aware of it until I had already done my master's. It had existed for a little while before then, but not too much longer. It is a relatively new area in games. And I wasn't too happy in the government job after a little while for various reasons. And I found out that user research existed in games at Microsoft, and I've always been interested in games as long as there were computers at home and things like that. And I reached out to Microsoft, and they basically said, come back when you have a PhD. Because back then, a PhD was a requirement, or was at least something that you needed to get into this. And that's no longer the case. Quite obviously, from Brandon and Nick being here, a PhD is no longer something that you entirely need, but that's what they said. So I actually went off to the Netherlands, did my PhD there, again in traffic psychology, not in games. However, while I was there, I was teaching at a local university there that was a different one from Groningen, where I was getting my PhD, and I was teaching game design students about user research and UX. And I was also quite involved online with people working in UX in the IGDA Games User Research SIG at the time. It's now the GRUC SIG, the Games Research and User Experience SIG. And writing and doing stuff like that, and GDC, that kind of stuff. And so when I finished my PhD in models of driving behavior, I worked for a little bit as a postdoc, and then I got my first job in games, which was at Player Research, which is a consultancy company in Brighton in the UK. Worked at Player Research for a few years, and that was very much like hands-on research. I think in 2 years' time, I worked in over 70 games, lots of games coming in the door, often multiple games a week where you're running user research on them. And then after that, I was lucky enough to get recruited by Celia Hoden, who was the previous director of UX at Epic, who recruited me as a researcher on Epic team, came here, and then when she left Epic, I stepped up into this lead position. So I've been at Epic for around 5 years now.
I think you answered a question that a couple of people have popped into the chat, which is you don't need a PhD in order to work in this field, clearly, which I'm glad you answered. And then another question that I think I saw pop up here, which is, what are the differences between game UX and other types of UX? And I think you sort of answered it in what you were describing, because you spent a significant portion of your career talking about the fact that you work in traffic management and traffic research. However, there are clear crossovers in human behavior and human patterns, which have parallels to how people behave in a player scenario, but also in software usage, right? How was that for you when you transitioned into working for Epic Games and software development, engine development, particularly and in video games? And maybe the same thing for you, Nick, because you were working in a very different field.
For me, I mean, the common element in human factors is the human, like the perceptual and cognitive capability remains the same. It's just a different technological setting. The thing I do like about working in games compared to, say, working in road safety or another area is that, say, if you're designing a watch or even a car, you want it to be very clear, easy to use, no friction, no challenge kind of thing. But if you're designing a game, it's allowed to be difficult. It's allowed to be challenging. It's allowed to make people upset or even angry or frustrated. And so working in user experience in games is interesting to me, because what we're looking for is, okay, it's okay if someone's upset at this point, or it's okay if they can't get past this point, and we're looking for those friction points that aren't intended by the designer, that come up because somebody didn't understand something they were meant to understand, rather than them not understanding something they were meant to not understand. So when we're writing reports in games, we'll say, like, we saw the player struggle at this point. Is that intended? If it's intended, leave it alone, kind of thing like that. And the developers will come back and say, yes, that was intended, and then it's no longer an issue.
And for me, actually really interesting. I wrote a little note on the side screen for myself that I wanted to definitely mention this. But when I moved into game data analysis, especially under UX, one of the biggest things and the most difficult things for me was writing. At no other data analysis company that I have to write. I could do queries. I could write queries. I could definitely get the data, but actually writing about it and trying to explain it was extremely difficult. And I think for probably the first few months, I probably frustrated me. I had to rewrite everything I wrote. But the difference being when you're at a bank or you're at a major IT company, you're talking about, I guess like I always like the phrase "data doesn't lie." And so, if I look up how many people in a certain zip code have this certain thing, that is the facts, basically. That's what the data shows. I give it to the customer, and now they have their data, and that's all I'm doing there. While in the UX team under Ben, it's the data I'm analyzing is what people are saying. And so it's not that simple. Like, it's not as simple to say that X percentage of these people feel this way about a certain item. There's so many more factors and ideas, and I have the benefit of being able to look into the user experience, like where they've been, what they've done with our product, and then look at their results in like a survey and say, okay, well, the people who experience this or live this kind of life in our game or our product, wherever it might be, they feel differently about this than others do. And so it's this more like all-encompassing kind of this writing that I've never had to really do before. But I mean, I guess writing is the end product, but it's also the analysis, understanding it in a very different way that I did not have to do prior to this job. I think I've gotten pretty good at it. I'm not quite at like a PhD level or anything like that, but I've gotten a lot better, I believe.
Well, that really is a very interesting difference, I think, in games in general across all fields is, and especially for this one, like you said, outside of games, when you're doing user research, it tends to be like you said, Ben, very very focused on removing friction and making everything better and providing this golden path. Whereas in games, communication has to be really key in analyzing and collaborating, because things that on the surface seem frustrating or bad can be an opportunity. I always think of the bush in Fortnite in when party or the 100-player mode kicked off and people figured out that you could camp in the bush. And everyone, and traditional UX would say, put a bounding box around it, or make it smaller so people can see it. And we're like, oh no, let's make it a consumable. So now you can move around in the bush and make the bush worse, make it more bush-like. And that's, a car company would not be like, let's make the windshield wipers harder to use. People like it if there's three more button clicks.
Nobody's gonna grind for 100 hours to talk to their boss on Zoom, but they'll do it to fight a boss in a video game.
Hey, why is it? And maybe you guys know this, but do you think there are UX researchers really trying to solve COVID? Maybe it's too soon for that question, but maybe we need more UX
There's
research.
a lot of research going on.
Can we get users to get in line for the vaccine?
Maybe we could solve a lot of stuff by just throwing
in my
more...
previous life as a road safety researcher, like there's a lot of people that work in those kind of like big societal policy areas, that try and work out how to do that behavior change at a societal level. It's a huge challenge.
I bet.
And it sounds like, for anyone looking to get into this field, the commonality that I hear here is psychology. It's really, we're talking about people, and we're talking about how understanding people, their motivations and what they do. All three of you have psychology degrees. Would you say that that's still, like, if someone's thinking, I want to do this, should they be seeking out a psychology degree or looking for a school that's teaching UI UX? I know things have changed
Right.
pretty rapidly in even 5 years. Do you guys have any insight to that?
I think psychology is still one of the major career paths, but other ones are human computer interaction, which is usually taught by computer science departments. It's another common path into this role. And then I know people that have come into this role from biology, from because of animal behavior study there. I know people that have come into it from sociology and other kind of social sciences where you are also studying people. But I would say that probably psychology and human computer interaction are the most common, but also there are some dedicated user research degrees out there nowadays that certainly weren't around when I was in university. Those exist too.
I'd
So-
probably just. Oh, sorry.
but
Lost you
we're
for a
still.
second.
Do we? Go ahead, Brandon. No, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add. I
do
think
we?
we lost
Do we
you for a
still think
second.
that? Oh yeah.
But
You're
you go
back.
Okay.
No,
well,
you go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to add to that. As far as like psychology, I think the most valuable kind of information that you get out of those degrees where you do study science with people is just how would you apply the research methods and familiarity with those research methods in terms of how that works with people. That's pretty much comprises a lot of what we do here.
Yeah, like when I was doing psychology degrees, I had dedicated methodology classes every single year. Like methodology is so important.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah. That's some key insight because as we've discovered here, the degrees change very quickly, and schools kind of adapt to what the job market is asking for. So it's really key to understand what do I really need to learn, because as you know, what's really cool about what's going on now is you can even kind of shift from where you were and come into games now. Um, so it's really good to sometimes you have to apply to Epic for 10 years until you finally get that Google on your resume and you can get in. And so it's really key to know where you can go to school, start working, and how you can get into this field, because it's obviously not as cut and dry as I'm going to go to art school, get art degree, get art position. But it sounds like as the field gets bigger, of course, schools will grow and specialize.
Yeah.
But that's some really good insight, because I think people can find those topics within their program. So Ben, I know that you brought along some cool stuff to show us about some of the work you guys have done at Epic Games, which is really cool. This is really fun for us to get to show some of this stuff on the stream here. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to go through this. So would you mind sharing with us your
Sure
lovely
thing.
presentation?
All right, is that up?
Yes.
I see it.
Okay. Great. All right, so I'll just talk through this. First of all, I do want to acknowledge my entire team. So I said we're a relatively small team, but we have other user researchers on the team in addition to Brandon, and 2 other data analysts with Katie and Nick. We also have a designer on the team, Jim, who's been with Epic for a long time. Our project manager, Paul, who handles recruiting and managing our lab for us, who is a really critical part of taking that load off the researchers and is so much help. And then our lab analysts, which is Amanda, Ben, and Kayla. As Brandon mentioned, he was originally a lab analyst, and lab analyst in the team does a lot of the really at the coalface work of going out and interacting with the participants or doing the. So some of this has already been mentioned, but this is generally what I see our role at Epic to be in terms of UX. One is we should be confirming or helping to find the awesome. Often in UX, things can get overly focused on negative issues or issues that games have with poor UI or whatever it might be, and that's because those really jump out at people, that they're easy to see. But there's a saying in the usability community that good usability is like oxygen. You don't notice it until it's gone, and often it can be easy for the awesome or the good stuff to be missed. And part of our job should be calling out like, hey, this improved since last time we tested it, or this part really resonated with people. Then we already discussed this, but discovering the unintended friction, so the friction that the game developer didn't want to happen. A lot of UX is understanding what the game developer's intent is, and then checking if that intent is being communicated from their head into the game, and then out of the game into the head of the player that's playing the game. And then point 3 is provide data to inform decisions, and I do like to stress it's informing decisions here and not driven. Sometimes you hear data driven, and to me, I don't think data should drive it. Data doesn't really have good vision and often ends up being very short-sighted. Whereas data-informed approach, I think, is more collaborative and kind of this less weird dictator of numbers. So while I've talked about the main thing we do is find the right methodology for the question, we do have several kind of core methodologies that we use over and over. So that's what I want to talk through. Those are user experience testing, user experience review and competitive analysis, user experience data analysis, and then surveys. So user experience testing is where we would bring people into our lab and they would play the game or use the product depending on what we're testing. And we would observe them and ask them some questions and then make a report afterwards of, okay, well, in the first level, here's what happened, here's where the sticking points were, here's where the good points were, and return that to the developers. Obviously, we haven't really been able to be in a lab for most of last year, but we have been able to do this testing remotely through various tools. But this is kind of one of the core aspects of our session. I'll go on a little bit more into that. The way we do this is people sign up to come and test with us through this website, epicgames.com/UX, and they can sign up here and they join a database that we maintain ourselves. And that database, we've got some information about them, where they're located, what kind of game experience they have, and that kind of thing. Because when we go to run a test, whether it's for a game or for a website or Unreal or Epic Games Store, we want to be able to send out email and say, we'd like people that have experience playing Minecraft or experience using this particular website, or don't have it, depending on what we're recruiting for. So this is where we collect those people. And then this is kind of the result of what we are seeing in the lab. What I'm going to show here is video that I was able to find of the, as far as I know, the oldest existing UX test that was ever done on Fortnite from 2013.
Such memories.
So I wasn't with the company at this time, but you can see like some of the core of Fortnite was here, like even back then. Obviously, this is the Fortnite Save the World mode, as it's called nowadays. But what you can see here is the person playing the game, and then in the top right, you can see a camera of that person and our old lab in which they were playing in. You know, when we're watching this, would have a note sheet in front of us, and that note sheet would be separated into different areas. So this area, you know, would be maybe a defense area, because that's what they're doing. They're defending an objective right now. And we would be taking notes about, is this expected behavior that he's just out there with this 2x4 beating up these husks, or should he be swapping to these other items? He's not using much abilities or anything like that. You know, was this intended, was it not? And we'd talk about that. And a really useful thing is that we have timestamps on those as well, and we can see at different times where things happen, so we can go back and reference the video. And talking through that, let's. Okay, so this is our more modern setup. This is what it looks like nowadays if people are playing. So again, we've got the person in the corner up here, but we've not got them overlapping the screen anymore. We now have the capability down here to see the inputs that they're putting in on the controller as they're playing. So that's recorded to video. So we know which buttons they were pressing. So say if they walk up to something and try and interact with it and are pressing the wrong button, we can see that on this recording. We can see the time and date, what station they were at. And then down here, actually really important for us is the indication that we're recording, so that we know that we've pressed the right button and aren't wasting time. Just,
that
with
looks
somebody
like
and
it
having no
just kept,
data.
It looks like it just kept getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And also because we stream it to the company, so the company can watch from their desks if they want. We also have a streaming notification to make sure that we don't forget that it's also streaming or it's not streaming. So those are mainly for us, but they're good reminders for us that this is happening, because we can see this on the screen as the player is playing. So this is kind of the core idea of UX testing. Now, sometimes amongst the game community, they'll talk about focus testing, and often when they talk about focus testing, they mean kind of all user research that we're doing. But focus testing is actually a methodology that we don't use at Epic, and that's a methodology where you typically get a bunch of people in a room and just talk to them about a product. So maybe they'd play Fortnite for a little bit, and then they'd come into a room, and then you'd talk to them. We avoid that methodology because you get a lot of group dynamic problems and things like that. So we tend to focus more on this very individual approach where they're playing, and the most important thing we're watching out for is we're watching out for the behavior and interaction with the game. And that's one of the things we really stress to the players and the users, is that we're not testing them, we're testing the product. And that gets back to this idea of human factors, that products and things should be designed for people, not the other way around. So we can test the game, but we can also just test prototypes. And in general, the earlier you can test with UX, the better, because the cost of doing iteration is much lower if nothing's being committed to code or nothing's in the engine or whatever. So this is an early artist mock-up for the Maya system that was in season 11, I believe, of Fortnite Battle Royale, or chapter 2, season 1. Was it season 2? Okay, yeah. That's right. So this was Maya, where you could swap out the different parts of her, and we were able to get some users to interact with this. It was you could click on it and use it as if you're using the actual game, even though it was just static images, and we could get some early data for refining that. And it doesn't have to be as fancy as that. We've also done testing with something as white boxed out as this, where again we're just seeing at this stage, how do people move through this, how do they understand this, and how does it work for them. And you can get even simpler. So this is another prototype that we've tested for the Save the World interface, where it's very stripped down and probably doesn't look like anything like how it would look like in the actual thing, or a lot more stripped down than that. And then also we can do card sorting, which is not technically a UX test, but this is also as stripped down as you can get looking at UI, where what you're asking people to do is say, this example here is for redesigning the Save the World front end, and it's to say, where would you expect to view all survivors? Well, you expect to view all survivors under the team heading, so they sorted into there. So this is a sorted a card sort someone's already finished, but when a user would actually come to the screen initially, all these little categories here would be not sorted under these headings, and then we'd ask them to put them into the. And by doing that, you kind of build an interface that makes sense to people because you've tested it ahead of time. And then I think the most early we've ever tested a prototype was this for Paragon. And this was a system that was being built for Paragon, and we tested an interactive Excel sheet where people were just clicking on buttons and to see if people understood this and what their impressions of it were. So this really illustrates that
Nobody believes
it's very
me
important to test early,
when
and
I-
it's very possible to test early.
That looks like a
Yeah.
baseball
no
game.
one believes no one believes us when we say Excel is one of the unsung heroes of game development. If you want to learn one bit of Office and succeed in game development, it's probably going to be Excel. It shows up in the strangest of places. So you're saying that this is actually an interactive Excel? Like those are buttons? I
Yeah,
didn't
it was
even know you could
it was
do
it
that.
was an interactive Excel that you could do like a list kind of little thing in there and play a little crafting game. That was then it did eventually go into Paragon, but it went in quite a different form, and that was informed by testing that started with this Excel spreadsheet and then moved up through a series of different prototypes.
But do you need a master's degree to make an Excel sheet of this caliber? I think you do.
I don't know. This excellent Excel sheet was made by a game designer, so I think it's beyond me.
You know that some crazy
Oh,
person
that
actually-
explains it.
somebody made a ray tracer in Excel.
Nice.
True. They did.
So the next thing is UX review and competitive analysis. I don't really have too much to show here, but this is say that a project is too top secret for it to be put in front of players, or things are moving too fast to be able to recruit players. Then my team can do a UX review where we apply our knowledge from heuristics or from first principles or from working with previous players of what may and may not be an issue. And then competitive analysis is just where we would go out and look at different competitors and make sure that we understand what the standards are in the industry. Because one of the important things of usability is if people know how something works because it's done that way in a popular application, if you do it that way, people also understand how it works. So say if we want to improve our payment flow in EGS, we go out and look at different types of payment flows and go, okay, this place does this and we think that's good, and this place does this and we think it's bad. And we would report that back so the designers could. So this is some work that Nick did for us. So this is user experience data analysis. So Epic's got its own data analyst folks that work at it, and we're actually on the bigger insights team that includes the other data analysts. But what Nick can do is he can take some focus on specifically user experience questions out of that data. So what you're looking at here is a mobile screen of a Fortnite user with a heat map over top of where people in the wild who are playing Fortnite have customized their HUD. So you can see like where the colors group up. That's a very common position for them to have moved a particular button from its default position, or whether they left in the default position or not. And this is really useful for us to come up with ideas for if we want to improve the default HUD, we can look at how people have been customizing it and go, okay, well, they've been moving these things in. Maybe we should move that in on the default one too, because maybe it would help. And then the final things we do is surveys. Nick's talked about this a little bit. He's our main survey person, although he does have the help of Katie and Drew nowadays. We have two types of surveys. This is the email survey. The way the email survey works is if somebody has a Epic Games account and they have a valid email address on that account, and they have also agreed to let us contact them, that means we can send them emails with surveys. And often when we do send out these emails, they end up on social media and people will reply and say, I never get these surveys, how do I get them? Well, the answer is have an Epic Games account, make sure your email is valid, and then you have to actually agree to receive emails from them. But the idea behind this is we can get a lot of good data from looking at social media, and what people are going out there and saying. But we also want to be talking to the people who don't feel passionate enough to hop on Twitter or hop on Reddit or wherever it may be. So we're getting a wide representative view of our player base. So we've got the social users, and then we've got users we can reach through email and the other type of surveys I'll talk about. And so we send these surveys out relatively regularly. We have a product called the Fortnightly Fortnite Survey that we send every 2 weeks. And it lets us track things like, okay, we just made this change in this latest patch. How does that make our players feel about certain aspects of the game compared to the last 12 times we ran this survey? And we can track it over time, and we can see where sentiment and player trends are moving. And then we also do kind of once-off bespoke surveys as well. So if something is particularly interesting to a developer and it's not something that can be answered by our fortnightly survey, we can do a very specific or targeted survey. So one example of this is before the Fortnite crew came out, we did a survey where we did one very specifically about the crew screen, and did people understand it and what did they think about it, and get that one out there. Our other type of survey is our in-game survey. One of the things that I think anybody working in research and survey research knows nowadays is that a lot of people don't use email anymore, or if they do, they don't check their email. And that means that when you're doing the email surveys, it can be difficult to reach the people that we want to reach. However, what we do know is that people are playing our game. So whenever you play Fortnite, there is a random chance that when you are playing, that you can be presented with a survey. And we have a whole broad number of surveys. So I think we've got over 200 different surveys that can pop up. And they're localized, so they appear in the language people are using. And they pop up and ask various things like satisfaction with the game, or what do people think of a particular weapon. And we've got this big variety of them. And we often get like memed on social media that we ask, like, how powerful do you think the cabbage is? And people think that's funny. And it is funny, but it's important for us to ask about the cabbage as well as the sniper rifle, so that when we build the data set, we can say, okay, people rate sniper rifles like this, and they rate cabbages like this, and we can kind of understand people's sentiment and views on things. So this is a really cool tool for us, and we're hoping to add to this and improve it. Obviously, you can't do as bigger questions in game as you can do in an email survey. That's one of the advantages of email, is you can get into open-ended and you can do much more complicated question types. But in the in-game survey, it has the advantage of being right there. And of course, with these surveys, we make sure to put people on cooldown. So once they have a survey, they aren't just flooded with them over and over again. And also people can choose to opt out of having these surveys in the app itself. So yeah, that's it. That's pretty much the main methodologies that we use and the approach that we take. Oh,
that is what a cool insight. Thank you so much. I think it's very rare to get to see what these places look like our UX lab. That tends to be something that we don't show in all of the brochures. And also, seeing some of that, like the heat map, and how many different ways that we look into stuff. There were some really good questions there. A couple of people were asking about eye tracking and biometrics, and if we've used those in the past. Obviously, right now with COVID, it's a little harder. But have we dug into that? Has that been an important part of our research in the past?
yeah. So I've talked at GDC about using biometrics in user research. It's not something that we do often at Epic, and there's quite a lot of reasons for that. As I say, like, I have an almost hour talk about why I don't recommend biometrics and the problems with biometrics. But the thing is, maybe someday it will get there, but at the moment biometrics are not specific enough to be particularly useful. So what biometrics are really good at is detecting emotions people don't know that they're having. However, in a game situation, if somebody doesn't know they're feeling excited and you can't just ask them, then something's wrong. Like the whole point of games is the person needs to feel it. They need to be engaged. They need to have the impact, and it needs to reach that level. And biometrics really excel at reaching that under level. There's also a lot of problems with biometrics in terms of they're not very specific. So heart rate you could look at for something like mental workload. It's one of the heart rate variability can measure mental workload. However, heart rate variability, like if you've been doing something for about 20 minutes, what the pattern that looks like mental workload can swap on you because your body tries to maintain homeostasis. And also even things like taking a deep breath will change your heart rate variability, or thinking about your lovely wife or husband or partner at home can change your heart rate variability. So there's these kind of specificity problems that come along with it, so that even if you do use biometric, you're also going to have to use questionnaire and behavior observation. And then the other challenge using biometrics in a game situation is game UX has to move really, really fast because game development moves really fast, and biometrics are fundamentally slow. At least at the moment. As technology moves on, maybe that won't be the case. The exception to that is we do use eye tracking. Eye tracking is technically a biometric, but really it's just a technologically enhanced observation. It's just tracking people's eyes and where they're looking. So much like other behaviors, like watching what their hands are doing, it's watching what their eyes are doing. So we do use that, and that can be quite useful, but it also has some downsides in a game setting in that it's really good for UI, but games are 3D, and eye tracking is 2D. It's on a 2D plane. It can't tell you if there's a couple of things overlapping if they were looking at the one in the background or the foreground. So there is some limitations there as well.
Interesting.
And then another question that I thought was pretty interesting was we talked a lot about kind of researching existing users and people already in the ecosystem. How do we research people that are outside of that have not agreed to receive surveys, and do we look outside? I know you talked a little bit about like competitive analysis. How do we research people that we're not engaged with already? Do we?
I mean, obviously, we can't email anybody. We can't email anybody that hasn't agreed to be emailed from us. That's just not legal. So we can't do that. We can look on social media. So if people are sharing things, we can see trends there.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick, what's another path that we can take?
Well, there is also the option to panel research, which is basically using an external provider to ask questions to individuals who are outside your ecosystem. It's commonly used in a lot of companies for marketing. Very small if we take advantage of that. That's the main I'm thinking of. I know, just Reddit, for example, is a really interesting little gold mine of little tidbits of information, like Ben was saying. Social media is really useful for that kind of stuff. But it's always, for at least in my experience, it's always best when you can target those people that we have data for, so you know what kind of user they are, as opposed to you don't know what you're going to get with one of those other panel providers.
I saw an interesting question as well, and I don't know how you can answer this, or if you can answer it, or if it's totally fair, which is in a COVID world when the UX lab probably is more complicated to access in a physical capacity. Have you found ways to still do the user research testing in a virtual capacity or a remote capacity?
Yeah, so that was a major problem for us as soon as we stopped working from home. We're able to get around some of it with Zoom. So when we're doing the testing of the kind of digital prototypes, that's low latency enough with UI and things like that we can do it through Zoom and sharing screens and letting people take over a computer and interact in that. It's not really good enough if we want to test Fortnite or a game project. So we're for that we're using a software called Parsec, which is being used by a bunch of different games companies and other companies to do similar things. And it's essentially a remote desktop tool, but it's been optimized for very low latency. So it's like Stadia or one of these streaming services. So the player can sit at home and they log into a remote computer and the game is streamed to them, but it plays very similar to if it was on their own machine. And it also has quite a good advantage for us in that we don't need them to install anything on their computer, because that's obviously a security concern. All they need to do is install Parsec, and then everything's streamed to them. If we hit a situation where we feel uncomfortable or we don't want them to have access to the content anymore, we can just cut that off immediately, and everything's safe. There's nothing on their computer.
So then you
I
use
wanna-
webcams.
I want to mention too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So then you use webcams the way that you would in a UX lab to sort of interact with them and observe their behavior, and
Yeah.
so you can continue this sort of testing in the future if you need larger samples, because there were other questions about samples as well. So this actually presented opportunities as well as not just limitations, I would presume.
Yeah, we're hoping that, the advantage of a UX lab is you control it. It's a controlled setting, all the variables, and you also have control over the security. Testing remotely, you lose some of that control, which is a little bit scary. But one of the disadvantages of our lab is essentially only people that live locally can come into our lab. So only people that live in the Cary Raleigh area can come into our lab. However, as we've now got this remote testing capability, we've been able to test with people on the other coast, or even test with people in different countries if we wanted to. So we are hoping that this experience of working from home and working out what that flow is can also pay off once we are back in the building.
Interesting.
Maybe we can continue to do remote testing for some things.
Very cool.
I want to mention super quick, because you brought up Parsec, that we actually have partnered with Parsec in education. And if there are any schools that would like to use Parsec, if they've got existing labs and their students are working from home, I posted a link in the chat. We've partnered with them, and they will give you a license for your labs so that you can do this yourself during COVID. I just wanted to bring that up. If you are, an educator, that's really good, and I've used it, and it's remarkable how well it works. And
yeah, it's very
the fact
good
that it can work for a game testing like for Fortnite speaks volumes for how good it actually works.
Yeah, our participants say that it's like playing it on their own computer. It's been very good for us.
Yeah, I used it to do some presentations, and I forgot that I was using a streaming computer until my internet glitched and it got blocky for a second. And I was like, my desktop, well, yeah, this is streaming. It's really cool. So yeah, if you're an education institute that wants to look into that, please give them follow that link and give them a call. I had a question and then I made myself forget it because, I had to talk about Parsec for a second. So as we're kind of moving forward into the next generation here, and Unreal Engine 5, and we maybe move back into a post-COVID world. Is there any advice that you guys have for people who are either students currently, educators, or I think there's a lot of people who are like Nick or me, that have come from other industries and want to come into games now as they watch Unreal get big, and they watch games kind of infiltrate every part of their world. over the next year or two, do you see any like real opportunities for students and educators, or any real challenges, anything that they should do, um, if you were to hire someone 2 years from now, what would you wish they had studied right now, if that question makes any sense?
Yeah, Nick, do you want to go first here?
When you started talking about that, my first thought, and it's the always goes on mind first, people talk about what to do to get into the industry, and it seems simple, but I always say first is to apply. A lot of people wait to apply until they think the resume is perfect and they think everything is right as it should be. Apply for the job you think you're qualified for, and test your luck a few times. Get your foot in the door. Don't spam recruiters with applications, but get your name out there. Definitely, that's number one. But for education, I think you already said this actually, and I want to just really stress: Excel is the unsung hero of every job, and I think being good at using Excel or Google
You're not
Sheets
allowed
or
to
any
use
equivalent.
Excel, Nick.
I use Excel. But if you prefer Google Sheets or any other competitor, being able to use spreadsheets and not even like to the macro level, but just being able to use VLOOKUPs, basic equations, formulas, it's so important, and it comes in. It comes in handy so often with so many different tasks, be it UX testing, be it data research, whatever. You're going to be using Excel or Sheets or something. But yeah, definitely, that's the one thing I'd say. I wish I saw more resumes that just had the word Excel somewhere, just so I'd know, like, cool, they can do the basics for me.
I think for me,
I think some people might be afraid to put like Excel on their resume.
Put it on your resume.
Because then they'd have to do Excel all the time.
yeah. I think
That's
for me,
true.
a big tip I have for people is to get involved if you want to get into games user research and games UX, is get involved with the communities that are out there. It is a relatively small field right now, and I mentioned it previously, but there's grux.org, which is the Games Research and User Experience SIG of the IGDA. If you go to that website, there's a bunch of resources there. There's a jobs board there. There's links to talks and the conferences that they run every year. And there's a Discord server where you can hop on that Discord server and you can be interacting with people like myself and people from all over the UX world in games. So that's a really good community to get in there and get involved. There is a risk that comes along with that in terms of also the games user research community is small. So if you want to get involved, you need to make sure that you are not a antisocial, nasty person on the internet, particularly about other people's games or whatever, or in professional spaces where it can be seen, because it's small enough that the hiring manager that you apply for may be told by somebody else or maybe see it themselves of you doing this behavior. So that can be a downside to getting involved. But I think the upside to getting involved is because the community is small, it's still relatively easy to get your name out there, and particularly if you can show that you're smart and hardworking and getting things together, that's also good. I do want to address some stuff I've seen in chat about representation, and I 100% accept that there's 3 white dudes up here, and as lead, that's my responsibility. That I would rather that not be the case. As a field overall, UX is actually more diverse than is typical in games, but it still has a long time to go, and I fully acknowledge that, and I think it is an area that we need to work on in UX and in games in general.
Thank you for addressing that, Ben. It is something that I think we're all very aware of. It can be difficult to address. So thanks for wading into that. It is something that as people who work in education, it's something that we are aware of and think about and try to work towards a solution on a daily basis. And it's part of why we do the stream is to help help people understand all of the opportunities that are available in games. And it's not just, I need to be a programmer or a great artist. Whatever your skill set is, whatever your passion is, and whatever your background is, I think that the games industry is exceptionally open, and we're challenged that we often just don't have the people that we want to select from. And so, it starts with schools and getting people as early as, in middle school to start looking towards this field, no matter, their race or gender or creed. We want them to feel like this is the land of opportunity, and to get started. And so,
Yeah, I mean that's very much kind of the core of human factors and UX as well. Is like you look to the systemic issues, and there's certainly systemic issues that are at the heart of this that need to be addressed, and we need to deal with it. Like even things like Nick said, just apply for things. It's well known in research that women are less likely to do that approach than men. So even just that biases the candidates that are coming in through the door. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, and it's certainly something that I'm well aware of as a lead and am passionate about.
But even the understanding of the fields in general, right? So when I started talking to you, Ben, and Tyler, right? So the UX team has grown, the UX UI team has grown at Epic, and so we started talking a while back, and we were originally going to have one stream, and this is a little bit of a departure from what we were just talking about, but it is a significant field, and we were going to have one stream that talked about UX and talked about UX UI, and over the course of discussing this, even last year, we realized that this is a very significant area of study. It's a significant area of work, and we determined it would be best really to separate it into a couple of different streams, because look at it. And we've got a chat full of people. We've got a very active stream here with people very interested in what we're doing, because there's a lot of people that are studying this very actively in school, and not just from a research perspective, but also designers, artists, and programs that are focused on this area of study and this area of work. So right now we are looking to have another stream next week that are focused on the artists, designers, and programmers in this field, because there was enough to talk about just in the research aspect of what people do with regard to UX. And so it's important for us to dedicate this time to talk about, this particular area where you've got psychologists and where you've got people that are focused on the human factors, which may draw a very different demographic into, what appeals to people about this work, versus artists and designers and programmers. You've got data analysts and researchers that may have gone to school for something completely different, like you did. You were working in a zoo. So,
Yeah.
I think that there is enough interest in what we're talking about here, particularly with the audience that we reach out to. So I think this is great for everyone, culturally and across very many areas of interest. So I'm really happy that we've got so many people here in the stream.
I think that'll be a really great stream. The UX designers at Epic are absolutely awesome. We love working with them at every opportunity. Like, it's so fantastic. It's always the best thing in interviews or whatever. A candidate will say, "What's the best thing about working at Epic?" And the answer is always the people, and such an easy answer. And the UX designers at Epic are fantastic people to work with. Be cool to have them on here too.
I think it's the slide, actually, but I think the people are pretty good. The slide is definitely the best thing about working at Epic.
I've never seen you go down
for
that
me,
slide, Nick.
it's
You can't.
I went down twice, probably.
It's hearing the screams of terror as they go down the slide is quite honestly the fun part. That slide is way faster than you expect.
Feels like it shakes the building.
It's not a subtle way to get down from the second floor, that's for sure. Brandon, do you have any final remarks for everybody about what we talked about today, or anything else?
Yeah. I'm just gonna kind of piggyback off of Nick's last statement a little bit, not about the slide, but just kind of um, when kind of just from my experience journeying from education from my bachelor's to here, uh, when I was working in the human factors lab at Georgia Tech, my responsibilities were fairly similar to kind of what I handle on the day to day here, um, at a more junior level. But when I graduated and I moved up to North Carolina, I actually did have a fairly hard time finding a job, getting in UX for a while, which kind of required me to go and I got a certificate. And while I was getting that certificate, I got an internship, which gave me some more industry experience and allowed me. I actually met one of the other researchers at Epic through some meetups at that company. Um, and I think that one thing that I'm probably like a broken record for a lot of people, but for students and educators is just really promoting any opportunities to work in industry. If you want to work in industry, you should try to get some as soon as you can, if it's an internship or a part-time job or anything like that. It's gonna help a lot with not only there like subtle differences between with research specifically, between what kind of research you're going to do in academia versus what you're going to do in industry, kind of balancing that line, but as well as just getting you some more experience that's going to make it easier for you to get jobs in the future.
And one thing I should call out, Nick and Brandon didn't mention this about themselves because they're too modest, but they both joined the team as contractors and did so exceptionally well that we converted them into full staff. So, that's also another path, but, they both came in through that method.
As somebody who was a contractor for quite a while, I know a lot of people stay away from contract work, but like Brandon was saying, experience is experience, and it really adds up quickly. You do a contract job, your next job is only going to get better. So I definitely encourage people to try contract work, especially if you're not right now. If that's an opportunity, take it. Don't wait for that perfect full-time role. Do something
Yeah.
shorter term, and it's still a really good opportunity.
Yeah, as they say, perfect is the enemy of good. And I think a lot of students, especially coming out into the job market, have an anxiety about, I have to get, that job. That's the path forward. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it really is. There might be 12 different small jobs between you and where you really want to go. But each one of those is going to provide you some food, which is important, but also give you, some knowledge and some background. And, each one of those jobs that goes onto your resume, it speaks to your accomplishments. And, um, I'm very similar. I applied to Epic Games, 10 years ago, then 3 years ago, then 5 years ago, and then finally I got an interview. It was only after I did, a million contract things and produced a bunch of Unreal stuff, and and I was devastated on the first, rejection. Where do I go from here? Well, I'm going to go work and do some engineering and some, serious games and some other games, and then, end up where I wanted to be. And I think that that's just sage advice is to have patience. And you can get to where you want to go, but you might have to put in maybe a decade more work than you expected, but the work is there. So
I think it's important. A lot of people, the idea is you become the perfect candidate for the job you want, but jobs are not these there's not infinite jobs out there. If you become this person, this role, there's not going to be a job for you necessarily in the place you want to be at the time you want to have it. So yeah, I think patience is a huge lesson there. You don't wait and do nothing while you're waiting for that. Try to keep working, getting new experiences, learning how to cross new bridges while you're waiting for that opportunity you really want to open up. And who knows, maybe by the time you get there, you'll realize you don't want it after all, which I've seen that a lot too.
Yeah, totally.
I've met a few
Absolutely.
data analysts who they finally got to the field and they hated it, and then they realized their whole education, everything up to that point, they kind of regretted it, and they kind of shifted over. Luckily, a lot of the jobs that we do, they could be used in a lot of different types of careers, a lot of different fields. Not these skills are transferable, 100%.
It's important to meet people, and we do have to admit there's also some luck to getting this, of being in the right time at the
Absolutely.
right place and that kind of
Yeah, true story
Work
for me. I
hard
actually
and
applied.
get support.
I actually did not apply for this job. I applied for a game tester job because I just want to get in the field and I figured I'd try it again. And the HR person who called me, she said, "Well, there's this one job in this other team. You might not be qualified for it." And apparently, Ben saw my resume, let me interview, and here I am. But just keep applying, keep trying. He's your foot in
He
the
was
door.
qualified.
He was.
The narrator. He was. Well, I want to thank you guys for joining us and taking your time out of your obviously very busy schedules. We'll let you get back to making everything that Epic does better for our humans. And yeah, this has been really fantastic. And thanks, Ben, also for your presentation and giving us a peek into some classic Fortnite footage and some of
never
our
been shown before.
work. Never
outside of
been
Epic.
shown before.
World premiere.
It really is cool to see, where it came from and where it is now. This has been really fantastic, and also thank you all for all your advice. Thank you to our audience. You guys are phenomenal. Thanks for all the questions and the enthusiasm and the great comments. We just love doing this stream and hanging out with you every week. So in 2 days on Thursday, we'll have our Inside Unreal stream again, of course. So please tune in then. That will be 2 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. And then we'll be back, as Lewis mentioned, next week on Tuesday with another education stream, 2 p.m. Eastern as well. So please tune in. And thanks again, everybody.
I throw in
Have
one
a-
last little tidbit.
Oh,
Just one
yes,
last little bit. I
wherever
won't
you
go
are
into-
in my.
Yeah, I read literally millions of responses from the players every year, and I don't get to ever talk back to them. So if anybody's listening who's actually taken one of our surveys, I absolutely love the Fortnite player base and the Unreal user base. You guys are
You're
the
all
best.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're all awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And everything you ever tell us, we do listen. We try however we can to share what we can, and we absolutely adore people who play games. And
That's great. That's great. Glad you got a chance to share that back with everyone. I'm sure they super appreciate it.
And please, everybody, sign up to be a tester if you're interested, and make sure you've got all the things checked for our surveys. If you'd like to be a part of that, sounds like there's a couple of things you need to check to get those surveys in game and in your email. That will help us all out considerably. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lewis, Ben, Nick, Brandon. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.